Okay, great. So we'll just go ahead and get started. Hi everyone, thank you all so much for coming today. This is YouthServe NYC's 14th speaker. And just to remind everyone, YouthServe NYC is a service initiative founded and run by young people who want to become more involved in the work of rebuilding New York City in the wake of the COVID-19 crisis. YouthServe NYC is a way to engage peers in service and in social justice. Today, we are so happy and fortunate to welcome Matt Jozwiak, who is the founder and chief executive officer of Rethink Food. Rethink Food is committed to reducing food insecurity with practical solutions that will have a lasting impact. Through their various programs and initiatives, they're building a network of restaurants, chefs, and more to provide nutritious meals for communities impacted by food insecurity. So thank you again so much for joining us today. We are so excited to hear about your work at Rethink Food and anything else that you'd like to share. And just to remind everyone, like I always say, later when we do questions, if you have any, you can just type them in the Q&A function or chat them privately to me and I will read them aloud. So thank you again, and over to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And thank you for having me, Eleanor. I really appreciate it. So I thought, in preparing for this today, I was thinking that it might be best to just kind of tell everybody how I got here, the road that kind of led to Rethink. I think that would be helpful. And just to note that currently Rethink is active in about 5 cities and producing about 100,000 meals every week for community centers all over the country. So I was I tried to go to college and I was having issues getting loans and getting set up. So I looked for a job, and the only job that I could actually find was within the service industry. And so I became a dishwasher at a small little restaurant outside of the college university in Lawrence, Kansas. And I immediately was very excited about the culture. Everybody was very nice. Everybody was very pleasant. They taught me a lot about food and wine and service and these things that I never really got to see. I never got to see growing up. And so I was like 18 years old, kind of bright-eyed, washing dishes, learning about the industry. And over time, my boss said that he thought it would be best if I moved to Chicago, where there was a lot of great stuff going on in food. So I moved to Chicago for a couple of years, and then there was a really big recession in 2008, and the restaurant I was working at basically closed. So I moved back to my hometown and started to really save my money to go on a journey to Europe. So I worked at some restaurants with another group of amazing people, and found myself in the south of France, cooking at a very, very small restaurant. And what I really learned there is that nobody ever threw food away. And in the States, when you worked in restaurants, there was always a lot of food waste. Everything got thrown away basically at the end of the night. But in France, it was really interesting to me that almost every single piece of every product got used in some way. And if we didn't know how to use every piece of every product, we wouldn't buy it. So now in 2010, I moved to Lyon, France, and started working at some more super fancy restaurants and cooking there as a chef. And later moved to Noma, which at the time was like the highest rated restaurant in the world. And then I moved to 2011, I moved back to the States. So at this point in my career, I'm 26 years old. I feel like I've done some good stuff, but I really did not feel very fulfilled, even though I thought that I had kind of chased my passion and got to complete it and got to see all this amazing stuff. I wasn't very happy with what I was doing. So I started to really think about it. And I thought, what's kind of missing from my life is being an active member of my community. And so I really didn't know how to get involved with anything. And my friend that I met in Europe grew up in the South Bronx, and he was teaching kids how to cook at some schools up there. And he called me and said, will you come to New York and help me do it? And I said, I'd love to. So I moved to New York and started getting involved in education, very small pilot program level, nothing really ever got off the ground. And I thought about it a lot, and I was like, well, I'm not really a very good teacher, I think, as you can all tell. I'm not a really good teacher. That's not really what I know how to do. And I thought about social service, and we think about social service a lot at Rethink, and we talk about it a lot. And what we like to say is that we do what is needed to be done and not what we want to do. And that's when I kind of had that revelation. And I was cooking at that time full-time at 11 Madison Park, which was the highest rated restaurant in the world in 2017. They took the title away from Noma. And I really, really thought a lot about like, what are the things that need to be done in the food system that nobody really wants to do? And it was collecting all the food that people were going to throw away at the end of the night, and renting a van and driving around the city, you know, at midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, and partnering with these restaurants to collect the food. And then we brought it back to a kitchen in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, made meals out of it, and then catered local community centers. And this was our big thing, because a lot of times community centers are left with kind of what they can get, like not scraps, but like it's very challenging. And they're food and beverage businesses. So it's like running a free restaurant with whatever people drop off. It's really very hard. So in our mission, we were trying to make really beautiful, delicious food for community centers that was easy, so that they didn't have to think about it or work too much, or they could just heat it up and go. So over the years, we evolved the model, 3 or 4 years, grew the business. You know, we started hiring a couple of people, we rented a couple of trucks, we rented a space, we really started to get off the ground with donations. And it's kind of cool, we found out that when you focus on doing what nobody wants to do, everybody's really excited to help you do it. So when you focus on what you want to do, usually there's a bunch of people who want to do it, so it's competitive. But when you focus on a problem that nobody really knows how to figure out or doesn't want to figure out, it's pretty easy to get a lot of support. So so everything was going pretty good. And then COVID happened in March of 2020. And it's kind of a whole other story. Should I go into that? Do I have time?
Yeah, that sounds great. You can go ahead into that if you'd like to.
Hopefully this is helpful. And COVID was the most insane experience of my life. We were fighting 3 very difficult situations. One, you know, there was a lot of unemployment, but the unemployment office was backed up. So there was a lot of people just no cash. And then the community centers that we partnered with were, you know, they were running out of, they didn't have anybody to work there, because a lot of people over 65 work at community centers. They were at highest risk. So a lot of the community centers closed. And then all of a sudden you had this huge wave of donated food that came into our facility. And you couldn't it was hard to find refrigeration, but we rented semi trucks and parked them in our facility that froze things, you know, kept things cold. And so we had a ton of supply, a ton of demand, but no distribution. So it was extremely challenging to figure out how to do that. And it got better, you know, as the first 4 or 5 weeks were awful, but like it got easier as we went along. And as people quarantined and social distance, the spread went down too. And we were working with hospitals and things like that as well. But what we realized was, you know, we were talking about it with my board, which as CEO, I spend most of my time with my board of directors, and then the staff at Rethink executes and does kind of all the stuff. And we were having 14-hour sessions talking and debating and trying to figure out funding, all this stuff. And we realized that it would be really smart if we really respected teams that were already in place. So in my situation, we're talking about restaurants. So there's a lot of really small, amazing small businesses in the neighborhoods that we partnered with that were, you know, ready to go, ready to make meals for local community centers. Some of them ready to hand them out themselves. So we kind of feel like we cracked the code on production and distribution. And but something really amazing happened. And this is when I talk about like being practical and logical and thinking about like what actually makes sense and not doing what you want to do. At least for me, but it never works for me. But we realized that we needed to cut down on shipping costs, because there's shipping orders all over the city all the time. So the fastest way to do that was to pick restaurants close to the community center And so the best person to ask about what restaurant to use was the community center. And they would tell us their favorite restaurants. We would get in touch with them and we would sponsor them with donated money to make meals and do all this stuff and then like cater the community center. And we just saw this really amazing thing, this really beautiful thing happen where, you know, Manna's Soul Food in Harlem distributed food from United Salem Methodist Church, which is on 128th Street and Adam Clayton Powell Boulevard. And people would see the Manna's sticker and say, wow, that's really awesome. When I get paid next week, I'm gonna go eat at Manna's. So Manna's got busier. The CBO, the community-based organization, got amazing food that everybody loved. And we built this really beautiful thing. And we don't put stickers on anything at Rethink. So we try to market the restaurants. And so we just kind of, you know, over the last year, we kind of developed some technology and the system to make it happen. Currently, we have 72 restaurants producing about 85,000 meals a week. And then our commissary kitchen, and we have a small cafe, produces about 15,000 meals a week. But it was a really crazy time.
That's great. Thank you so much. That's really informative. So I think we can transition into some questions if that works. We still have a lot of time left. So I can start off with a few questions, and then if people have any, they can ask those as well. But I was just wondering how or if your work changed over the years before COVID. Obviously, that was a drastic change, but as you were growing, rethink how it was changing in the years before last March.
Yeah, I mean, it's always kind of iterative. Like we always want to change and adapt and kind of bring things up. I think the big lesson learned for us is that like we at Rethink are probably the worst people to make the food, even though we have a really good, talented team. We have really good, talented cooks, but like in certain situations. But the best people, like in Chinatown, like we distributed food in Chinatown, nobody liked it. Then we got the Chinese restaurants to make it, everybody loved it. So we kind of learned that, you know, we used to be cautious of cultural sensitivity, but now we really are, now we say that we celebrate, we culturally celebrated dishes. Like we're all about it. So we saw a lot of improvement focusing on that.
Great. Okay. How do you look to build or grow Rethink Food in the future? And are you thinking about how to keep some of the practices that you started in COVID and as you look to the future?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we think about, a lot of times we think about dividing the program a little bit, but we want to see if we can, a lot of the problems that we see with our restaurant partners is, and I don't know if this is too deep for the crowd, but it's all about access to capital. Restaurants have a very hard time, especially young restaurateurs, like just getting the initial investment into their business so they can open the doors. Really great people, really great cooks just need to get that money. And so what we're looking at is trying to develop a program that will basically is like a loan for the restaurateur that we'll give them, but they'll pay it back in community meals, not money. So it gives them the opportunity to do some stuff. So we're kind of looking down that path, and yeah, that's helpful.
Great. Can you talk a little bit about your various programs, including Rethink Certified and the Rethink Cafe?
Sure. Yeah. So Rethink, we're always trying to build a circular economy, which means that like philanthropy is mainly paid for by donors or government agencies, which makes it unsustainable. Like government funding, when the president changes or whoever's in charge changes, your program can get removed. And philanthropy is, you know, donations of the general public, which is also hard to depend on. And so we're looking to build kind of interesting ways. So Rethink Certified is to build circular economies. So we work with a restaurant, 11 Madison Park, the one I used to work at. Every time somebody comes in, they donate $5. That $5 donated to Rethink. Then we sponsor them to make meals. So we're building like a self-funding circle that pushes out meals and brings in revenue. And we're really, really working on that. And so we're certifying businesses that are contributing to a sustainable and equitable food system. That's certified. And the cafe, which I was at today, which is looking good, it's on Clinton and Myrtle. It's a little, tiny little restaurant, and we use excess food, we use donated food to make a low cost, no cost, pay what you can meal. So you can come in, you can pay $1, you can pay $5, you can pay $10, you can pay $0, doesn't matter, for the meal that we give. And what we're trying to do there is, food waste, food excess is like a really, really, really big problem in our system. And so we're trying to look for something that's going to bring in excess food, make something out of it, and then distribute the food in a way that benefits a community, that pays for itself. So every time Rethink does something, we always think about, we have to have like the funding, the production, the product, and the distribution.
Great. Okay, so I know you've talked about this a little, but can you just talk a little more about the importance of restaurants as community centers in communities, as well as community centers as well?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I think that's a really, really good question. For me personally, if you're at the beginning of my story, like I couldn't afford college and I needed a restaurant. And so there's very few left entry-level jobs in our economy. And also, there's very few jobs where, you can be an actress, actor, whatever, you need just that little bit of money so that you can focus on what you want to do. And those jobs are really, really, really important, especially as we kind of move towards like a gig economy. So I think, especially we've seen a lot of our restaurants, kids pre-COVID would spend the afternoon in the dining room of KDOs, until 5 o'clock when their parents got up and their parents would grab dinner and bring it home. Like restaurants are just they're really, really important parts of our community. And so for me and Rethink, we're really looking for ways to kind of change the perspective that people have on restaurants. Unfortunately, they get a bad rap that like, they just get a bad rap. And it's really unfortunate because some of the most brilliant people I've ever met work in restaurants.
All right. Are you worried about restaurants or the future of restaurants? And are you worried about the jobs that were lost during COVID? Various jobs, chefs, dishwashers, deliveries, all that kind of, all part of that industry?
Yeah, definitely. I think that my biggest concern ultimately is that like AI is going to take over a lot of jobs and that joblessness won't get better, which will lead to just more wealth disparity. And so I think that's a really challenging, it's a really challenging thing to think about. So Rethink spends a lot of time thinking about how do you utilize small businesses to create a marketplace for people who don't have access to food. And we try to normalize it, right? Because it's not like we talk about college students all the time. We say, oh geez, they eat pizza and it's so bad, but we're actually talking about food insecurity. And so we're trying to normalize approaches. And that's what the Rethink Cafe is. If you go there, and I suggest you do on Clinton and Myrtle, it looks like a restaurant, but it's actually licensed as a soup kitchen. But yes, I'm worried about that.
Okay, I'll go to some in the chat. How do you think about scaling up the effort? You mentioned 100,000 meals in 5 cities. Are you looking to add more cities and more meals? Presumably this is a problem in every city and the need is in the millions of meals. And then there are some various ones, but we can start with that one.
Yeah, so we were lucky enough to partner with McKinsey & Company, who helped us develop basically like a zip code map based off of needs and median incomes and average price of food in that region. So it helps us try to understand, we only have so much bandwidth, we only have so much capital. So where we go is very important in that case. So we really, really try to think about it. We are seeing, believe it or not, especially in some neighborhoods that we've been in for a while, a reduction in the demand. So now we're trying to think about do we reduce it and then kind of implement more in other cities? But it's always a discussion. And that decision at Rethink is more or less made at the board level. How do we measure impact? We measure impact in a lot of different ways. We have 8 core KPIs. One thing that we actually look at is we talk about that circular economy that we were talking about before. We measure price per unit to kind of help us think about how do we spend less money on a meal, but how do we get more meals funded so that we're not dependent on that? And then we have goals for, outflows, inflows, meals served, regions, and things like that. We had a nutritionist do a fellowship with Rethink to help us develop materials and standardized guidelines to focus on that. And then when it comes to greenhouse gases avoided, we measure the poundage of food that we receive that's diverted but we just look at it in pounds diverted. It does, yes, we could convert it to greenhouse gases avoided, but it's just easier for us to say we're going from 100,000 to 200,000 or whatever.
So you've talked about the Rethink Certified programs, and you've talked about what it means for a restaurant or a corporate partner to be Rethink Certified. Can you just talk a little bit about the actual certification process and how they get to that point?
Yeah, it's really simple. So we're just starting this thing, and perfect is the enemy of progress, or whatever that saying is. So we really focus on trying to do things right, small, and then figure it out. So what we say is that if a business donates $25,000 in value, and that can be cash, that can be PR, marketing, that can be product. It can be a variety of different things, but we need people who are contributing to a sustainable and equitable food system. And then we also listen to our staff, we're really cautious. Like we don't work with, we try not to work with, I don't know how you say this, but we're conscientious of who the people are, and we're polite, we're kind. They identify with our core values, which are being inventive, being kind, being thoughtful, and also being vulnerable.
Okay, I'll look at another one from the Q&A. So you mentioned that Rethink is also in other cities. What other cities is it in, and are there differences between the programs? So if you could just elaborate on the work outside of New York City.
Yeah, sure. So we're in, yes, and it's the work is different because the cities are structurally different. Like the fact that Chicago has alleyways makes delivery easier, these kinds of things. But it's basically, we basically only sponsor restaurants in other cities to make meals. So we're active in San Francisco, predominantly in the Chinatown area, and with Dominique Kren, she's a chef out there. We cater a couple organizations. We're active in Chicago on the south side in Inglewood with a couple of caterers that make really good food. The caterers are an interesting choice because they have bigger kitchens. They're very entrepreneurial people. There's usually like one, maybe two people in the company, and they have transportation. So they can handle the transportation themselves. But that was a very unique Chicago kind of situation. DC, which is a very simple operations. And then Nashville is different as well. There's self-distribution via the restaurant.
Thank you. Okay, we have time for a few more. Do you work on policy at all, city or state or federal policies that affect food policy or anything related to jobs at restaurants?
No, I mean, to be honest with you, we do and we don't. I mean, we're supportive of like initiatives and things like that, and we've made recommendations as well for policies and changes that can go in. But we're a big fan of staying in our lane, and we only have so much time, so much money, so much capital. There's a really, really, really big problem out there. So though I have a lot of respect for Hunter and the Aspen Institute and Lori, blanking on it, but Lori Tisch's Policy Institute, I really believe that what Rethink has to do is create actual operational models to showcase how these things can work. And we can give that information to policy institutes for them to study and to push laws through, but we just need to actually prove it and get people fed instead of spending time the other way. Basically, there's other people that are better at it, is the short answer.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, as individuals, what can we do? Donate to Rethink, but also what else can we do as consumers and as restaurant goers, etc.?
I think it's just being conscious about your restaurant choices. Like, the little restaurant in your neighborhood that everybody has, like, sometimes it's easier to like order on Seamless or go to Chipotle because it's faster, but like, go to your local business, talk to the people who work there, like actually like engage with them. It's something we lost. And I think on the food waste side, the one thing that I always encourage people to do is don't, you know, make your grocery list, but like also make your waste list. So every time, you know, on Sunday or Monday when you're throwing stuff out or when you're whatever going out, like just write down what you throw out, and very quickly you'll see how to improve your own local sustainability, because food waste at homes is almost bigger than food waste in restaurants.
Okay, I think we can do two more. Where do you hope to be in 10 years, and what do you think your success would look like in 10 years?
I don't know. I mean, we think about that a lot. I think in 10 years, you know, if Rethink was totally funded by itself and the philanthropy dollars could be focused on other things, that would be ideal. But hopefully 5.
Okay, and finally, what is your advice to young people like us who want to get involved in more public service work? In your opinion, what are the best ways to do this? And what advice do you have to people who are very committed to the city and to serving vulnerable New Yorkers?
I think it's, you know, be open-minded, be vulnerable, do any job, do any job. That's my favorite thing in the world. Like you're not going to get like, you know, we have interns and stuff and they come in and they're all great. I mean, we've never had a bad intern, but there's this idea that you're going to like come to Rethink and be like, you know, composting or like sitting around and like philosophizing about the future of food. Like, no, we actually just need you to write Instagram posts. Like that's the job, you know? So it's all about getting in there, getting your hands dirty, and no job is too small. I started as a dishwasher. It's okay, you know? And so just getting in there and doing it and being that, and then surrounding yourself with positive people and friends. And also, there's no reason why you can't start something with a group of friends now, you know?
Great. Well, I think that's all the time we have for today, pretty much. But the recording will be posted on the website soon. So thank you so much to everyone who came, and of course to you. And yes, that's it.
All right. I really appreciate you having me. And if you want to learn more, reach out to rethinkfood.org.
Thank you.